Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're exploring a moment in digital history that, honestly, it sounds way too dramatic to be true, yet it is probably the single most important event securing your ability to, buy things online, check your bank account, or even listen to this right now.
It really is. It's the kind of story that you'd expect in a heist movie, complete with secret locations and a set of unique keys. But this time, the prize wasn't gold. The stakes were, well, they were global.
We are talking about the moment the internet stopped resting on a foundation of basically blind faith, and instead it secured itself with a handful of physical metal keys and a steel cage.
It's a fascinating story.
I want you to start by thinking about history in a slightly different way. Not as a smooth timeline, but think of it as a dam. For years, you have all this pressure building up, the rising water. That's the political negligence, the overlooked flaws, the exponential growth.
And in our case today, that rising water was the early internet's foundational fragility. It was a system built by for academics.
Little village, right?
Exactly. A small village where everyone trusted each other.
Yeah.
But then that village grew into a global marketplace, and that trust became a massive vulnerability. Researchers started calling it digital poisoning.
And the pressure was just immense. I mean, the scale of the vulnerability grew right alongside the scale of the network itself. If that core system failed, the entire global shift toward e-commerce, banking, everything, it would just grind to a halt.
The potential for catastrophic redirection of traffic, sending people to fake bank sites, fake government portals, it was an existential threat to the whole enterprise.
So the crack in the concrete, that's our turning point, the moment we're focusing on today. It was this meticulous, almost ceremonial event held on June 16th, 2010.
Right.
A small, globally selected group of experts met inside a high-security facility to physically, and that's the key word, physically generate the cryptographic keys that would anchor the web's ultimate foundation of trust.
And that physical ritual, that one day, led directly to the creation of this unseen shield that protects all of us now. It's a system called DNSSCC.
DNSSCC. It's the mechanism that underpins the trust symbolized by that little padlock icon you see in your browser's address bar.
That's the one. Without that ceremony, without that moment, the modern digital economy is, it's simply unimaginable. It couldn't exist as it does today.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore that entire journey. We are going to dissect the internet's original sin, that foundational vulnerability. Then we'll go inside the cage to witness the meticulously scripted ceremony.
And we have to talk about the harrowing near miss, the moment it almost all collapsed right at the finish line.
Absolutely. And finally, we'll trace that cascading chain of trust that followed, which now silently protects every single interaction you have online. Okay, so to really understand the intensity of that moment in 2010, we have to get our heads around the magnitude of the problem they were trying to solve. Let's unpack the internet's fundamental vulnerability. And it all begins with something called the domain name system, or DNS. Right.
DNS.
Yeah.
It's often called the internet's phone book, which is a helpful starting point, but it really masks the true complexity of it.
It does more than just look up numbers.
Much more. DNS is this huge, distributed, hierarchical global database. Its main job is to take a friendly, human-readable address, like the deepdive.com, and translate it into a precise numerical IP address, something like 192.0.2.1. That's the number computers actually use to find each other and route information.
It sounds like a basic utility, almost like digital plumbing. But if DNS fails, the whole thing collapses. You can't navigate, you can't find anything. But why was this essential piece of infrastructure so fragile from the start?
The problem goes all the way back to the original design ethos, which you could call the foundation of naivety, or more dramatically, the internet's original sin.
I like that, the original sin.
When DNS was developed back in the 1980s, the internet was, as we said, a small community of researchers. The system was designed to be helpful, to be efficient. So if a computer asked a DNS server, hey, what's the IP address for my bank.com? The server would just provide an answer. He made an assumption.
It assumed the question, and the information it got back was trustworthy.
Exactly. Trust was the default protocol. If I'm running a DNS server and you ask me for information, I don't ask for your credentials. I just assume you're operating in good faith.
And that assumption, that universal good faith, that's what became the profound vulnerability we now know as DNS cache poisoning.
Precisely. To stretch that phone book analogy a little further, imagine you run a small local phone exchange. That's your DNS cache. A malicious actor could come in and, by exploiting these trust mechanisms, trick your exchange into accepting and storing a false address for, say, Amazon or the Federal Reserve.
And crucially, your local exchange, your little phone book, it doesn't have a way to check the authenticity of that new number. It just accepts the update if it looks like it came from an authoritative source.
Correct. So the very next user who asks that now compromised local exchange for the real address gets silently redirected. They're sent to the fraudster site, which looks identical, but it's designed purely to steal their credentials.
And there's no warning, no red flag.
Nothing. Because there was no cryptographic receipt, no digital signature proving the address was genuine. This fundamental flaw existed, mostly unnoticed by the public, for decades. And as the internet grew, as the pressure built, researchers got more and more nervous.
So let's track that timeline of rising pressure. This wasn't something that just appeared out of nowhere in 2008. Our sources are clear that security experts saw this ticking time bomb very, very early on.
Oh, absolutely. The first major warning came from a researcher named Stephen Bellavin, way back in 1990. He was one of the first to really detail the significant security flaws in the DNS protocol. He recognized that the speed and trust built into the system would become its fatal flaw once the network scaled beyond that small academic village.
And his work was the catalyst.
It was the initial spark. It got people thinking about creating a solution, which, many years later, would become DNSSEC.
So we're talking about nearly 2 decades of knowing there's a fundamental, potentially catastrophic problem before the system was actually forced to fix it. Why on earth did it take so long?
It's the nature of fundamental infrastructure, really. It's like trying to change the foundation of a skyscraper while people are still living in it. Changing the DNS protocol means changing the rules for hundreds of thousands, now millions, of servers all over the world.
It's a massive coordination problem.
Massive. It requires huge political consensus, incredible logistical coordination, and you have to write technical standards that literally everyone on the planet can agree on and implement. The Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, they first started trying to standardize DNSSEC back in 1997, but that early version was, well, it's clunky. It was cumbersome.
So it took a while to get it right.
A long while. The modern, robust, foundational suite of standards for anyone interested, it's RFCs 4033, 4034, and 4035, that took another 8 years to finalize. They were finally published in March of 2005.
Okay, so by 2005, the blueprints are ready. The engineers know how to build the shield, but the vast majority of the internet is still completely exposed. And that brings us to the moment the theoretical flaw became a guaranteed catastrophe just waiting to happen. The Kaminsky bug of 2008.
This is the critical turning point. This is the shock that forced everyone to act. Dan Kaminsky, a brilliant security researcher, he didn't just find a new flaw, he fundamentally changed the game. Up until then, poisoning a DNS cache was difficult. It was a bit hit or miss, often relying on guessing certain random identifiers.
A long shot.
A very long shot. Kaminsky didn't just find a better way to poison a single entry in the phone book. He found a method to reliably and quickly poison the entire phone book at will.
Okay, let's get into the weeds a bit here. For our listeners who follow this stuff, what was the actual mechanism he exploited?
So the vulnerability was rooted in how DNS uses something called transaction IDs, or TXIDs, and combines them with source port numbers to match up requests with their responses.
Like a ticket number for your query.
A great way to think of it. When a server sends out a query for an address, it attaches a random TXID and uses a random source port. The response it gets back must match both of those numbers to be accepted as legitimate.
And Kaminsky realized the randomization just wasn't good enough.
Not nearly good enough. He figured out that by sending a flood of queries for domains that didn't exist within a target domain, so think, a.mybank.com, b.mybank.com, and so on, he could dramatically narrow down the possibilities. He could predict, or brute force, the necessary combination of the TXID and the port number, allowing him to inject his own false data into the server's cache before the real legitimate server even had a chance to respond.
So instead of trying to hit this tiny moving target just once, he basically multiplied his attempts by thousands, turning a guessing game into a certainty.
Precisely. His exploit took the time needed to poison a major ISP's entire cache, from months or years of pure luck down to a matter of minutes, or maybe hours. This meant that any sophisticated actor could redirect traffic from major banks, global payment systems, critical government infrastructure, all of it on a massive scale and completely undetected. It was the digital doomsday scenario.
And the accounts of this are incredible. Kaminsky, recognizing just how dangerous this was, he didn't publish it. He didn't go for the fame. Instead, he initiated what our sources call the global conspiracy of competence.
It's one of the most amazing high-stakes efforts in the history of the internet. It's really heartwarming, in a way. Kaminsky secretly contacted engineers from rival companies, Microsoft, Cisco, Sun Microsystems, you name it, and the main internet governance bodies. They held these secret meetings, often in sealed conference rooms, working together in total secrecy to build and deploy a silent, universal patch.
So why all the secrecy? You'd think with a flaw, this big transparency would be the best policy.
Not in this case.
Yeah.
The moment the specific details of his method became public, it would have been weaponized instantly by criminals and state actors all over the world. They were in a race against two clocks.
Too close.
Yeah. The first was against any malicious actors who might discover the same flaw independently. The second was against a scheduled security conference, where another researcher was due to present a similar, though less severe, DNS flaw. The sources all confirmed that if that conference had happened before Kaminsky's patch was deployed globally, his bug would likely have been figured out from the clues and exploited widely.
So they silently pushed a fix to hundreds of thousands of servers worldwide. The fix was basically implementing better source port randomization to make the guessing attack much, much harder. And they did this without telling the public why they were doing it until the fix was pretty much everywhere.
Exactly. A reactive fix was successfully deployed just in the nick of time. But the experience it was profoundly shocking to the Internet's governing bodies, especially ICANN. They realized that just patching holes wasn't enough anymore. The network needed a permanent cryptographic anchor, a way to prove that an address was genuinely signed by its real owner. The Kaminsky bug made the long-delayed DNS-SEC implementation an absolute urgent necessity. It was time to stop patching the old foundation and, well, build a new one.
So the threat was undeniable. The technology to fix it finally existed. The political will was, at long last, there. But generating the ultimate source of digital trust wasn't something you could just code up in an afternoon. It required an unprecedented level of physical security and, just as importantly, human accountability. Where did all of this take place?
The location they chose was all about maximum physical security. It was a high-security data center operated by ICANN in Culpeper, Virginia. And this was not just some standard server farm. This facility was designed to withstand a physical disaster. We're talking armed guards, multiple layers of biometric scanning, heavy steel doors, the whole 9 yards. Infrastructure built for continuity in almost any global catastrophe.
And deep inside this digital fortress, you find the core of the whole operation, the inner sanctum. Tell us about the steel cage.
Right, so the ceremony itself takes place inside a windowless, soundproofed room. And the centerpiece is this physically isolated structure. People call it a cage or an enclosure. Technically, it's a Faraday cage, which means it physically blocks all external electronic signal from getting in or out.
So no internet connection, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth.
Absolutely nothing. No remote access of any kind. The process is completely sealed off, both physically and electronically, from the outside world.
Why go through such elaborate, almost theatrical physical steps just to generate a line of digital code? Why couldn't they just automate this in a secure server closet somewhere?
And that is the central paradox you have to get your head around to understand this story. The key they were generating in there, the key signing key, or KSK, it's the cryptographic root of the entire internet. If that key is compromised at the moment of its creation, then every single layer of trust built on top of it is also compromised. Forever.
So they needed an ultimate guarantee.
An ultimate, provable guarantee that the key was not tampered with, not corrupted, not backdoored during its creation. The only way to provide that proof to the world was through human presence, bound by physical locks and a documented, audited, step-by-step procedure. It's the non-digital origin point for all future digital trust.
Okay, let's clarify the technical roles of the keys themselves, because the ceremony generates this KSK, but that isn't the key that's used on a daily basis, is it?
That's a crucial distinction and really important for a deep dive audience. The DNS-SEC system uses a dual key structure. It's for maximum security, but also for operational flexibility. The key generated in that cage is the key signing key, the KSK. This key is the absolute root of trust. It is kept completely offline inside that hardware security module, and it's only used 4 times a year during these ceremonies.
And its only job is to sign the other key.
Exactly. Its only job is to sign the secondary operational key, and that is the zone signing key, or ZSK. The ZSK is the key that's used far more frequently. It's the one that signs the actual DNS root zone data that gets distributed to all the top-level domains, .com, .org, and so on.
And because it's used more often, it's more exposed.
Right, so it can be rotated more often. It lives on a slightly less secure online system. The whole security architecture is designed so that if the ZSK is ever compromised, they can just use the pristine offline KSK to sign and issue a brand new, clean ZSK. And the entire chain of trust is preserved. So the whole point of the ceremony, all that security, is about protecting that ultimate KSK anchor.
Okay, so let's talk about the people. The people responsible for executing this ritual and maintaining this distributed trust. We've all heard the myth of the 7 key holders who can shut off the internet, which we know is completely false. But who are the actual keepers of the code?
The system is very intentionally designed around distributed accountability. The goal is to prevent any single point of failure or any single country from capturing control. The structure involves a large, independent pool of technical experts. They're called the Trusted Community Representatives, or TCRs. They are selected purely based on their technical skill and are deliberately geographically and culturally diverse. They often work for rival organizations or different governments.
And that diversity is the key, isn't it?
It is the ultimate safeguard against coercion. Think about it. If all the key holders were from one country or all worked for one corporation, that single entity could potentially force them to compromise the key. But by drawing representatives from places like, say, Paul Kane from the UK, Moussa Guebre from Burkina Faso, or Bevel Wooding from Trinidad and Tobago, you make it impossible for one state to exert pressure without the entire world finding out.
So what are the specific roles within that group of TCRs?
For that first ceremony, there were 2 main groups, each with 7 people. First, you had the 7 crypto officers. These are the individuals who physically attend the quarterly signing ceremonies. They are the ones who hold the actual old-fashioned physical metal keys.
Keys to a lock.
Keys to multiple safe deposit boxes. And inside those boxes are the smart cards that are required to activate the hardware security module. They are the ones who literally put their hands on the machine.
And the other 7.
They are the recovery key shareholders. These individuals, people like Jian Kongyao from China and Anchezu Suri from the Czech Republic, hold fragments of a highly encrypted password for the root key recovery system. This is the catastrophic backup plan. If the hardware holding the KSK is, say, destroyed in a fire, these individuals have to physically meet to reconstruct the password. And crucially, you need a quorum of 5 out of the 7 to make that recovery process work. Again, no single individual or small group can act alone.
So we've finally reached the moment. It's June 16th, 2010, 17.00.000 UTC. The ceremony begins. This is not some casual meeting. It is a high-stakes, meticulously scripted ritual.
Every single element is controlled. The crypto officers enter the facility, they verify their identities through multiple biometric scans, and they present their physical keys. The whole process is a long sequence of actions. The keys unlock the safe deposit boxes. The officers retrieve their individual smart cards, each card containing a required piece of the cryptographic puzzle, and then those cards are used in sequence to activate the hardware security module sealed inside that Faraday cage.
And I love the imagery of the ceremony master. This person isn't facilitating a discussion. They are reading word for word from a rigid script.
Absolutely. They use this thick binder that contains a detailed multi-100-step protocol. Every physical action, every key insertion, every sequence of button presses on the HSM's little interface, every password entry, it is all dictated and auditable. This dual control, the human script guiding the secure machine, is what guarantees the integrity of the process.
And what about transparency? Because that feels like the mechanism that builds global political trust in the whole thing.
Transparency is completely non-negotiable. It's a core principle. You have independent auditors from external bodies present for the entire thing. And they're not just watching. They are actively tracing the script, line by line, verifying that no step was skipped, no procedure was compromised. On top of that, the ceremonies are live-streamed and permanently recorded. They're available for anyone to watch in the archives of INEA. This public documentation is a crucial part of the social contract. They have to prove to the entire world that they've followed the agreed-upon rules.
After hours of this painstaking labor, following this rigid protocol to the letter, the final command is entered into the HSM, and what appears on that simple, isolated monitor?
The command generates the new cryptographic text. It's the first ever root zone key signing key, the KSK. It is the digital anchor the world had been waiting for since the Kaminsky bug laid bare just how vulnerable everything was. But the journey wasn't over, not even close. Generating the key was just step 1. Step 2 was surviving the verification.
This is where the story gets really tense. I mean, they've done the impossible. They've brought together global rivals. They've secured the keys. They've followed the script to a T. The KSK is on the screen. But the mood in that room shifts from achievement to just intense anxiety. You have to imagine the pressure on these individuals. The first-hand accounts are incredible.
Paul Kane, who was one of those original crypto officers, he reflected on this period. He described the focus as being so intense it was almost paralyzing. They all understood the razor-thin margin for error. The whole high-security setup, the script, all of it is designed to eliminate human error. But humans are, inevitably the weak link. The fear wasn't sabotage from the outside. The fear was an accidental dropped card, a momentary distraction, a misread line from the script that could lead to a catastrophic poisoning of the new key right at its birth.
The integrity of the entire future of the web rested on the flawless execution of a procedure that had never, ever been performed before. If they made a mistake here, they weren't just delaying the project. They might be generating a key that the world thinks is trustworthy, but is, in fact, corruptible from the very start.
And that is exactly why the final verification stage was the most stressful part of the entire day. They had the KSK generated, but before that key could be packaged, secured, and distributed to the world, they had to prove its integrity. This involved running one last diagnostic on the hardware security module itself.
So detail the specific near miss, the moment that plunged that room into absolute silence.
As the diagnostic began, the room fell utterly silent. Every single person, the officers, the auditors, the ICANN staff, all eyes were fixed on this one tiny indicator light on the HSM. The light was supposed to flash briefly and then settle on a solid green. Green means go. System health and integrity confirmed. Instead, it flashed amber, a warning, and then horribly it turned a steady, solid red.
And red means failure. In that environment, red is a complete disaster. What was the immediate implication of that red light?
It meant a hardware fault had occurred. And worse, it could have happened at any point, potentially during the key generation process itself. It was the absolute worst-case scenario. The brand new anchor key, the linchpin of global digital security for the next decade, might already be internally corrupt or compromised. It would render the entire day's work useless. And even worse, it could mean introducing a known flaw into the system before it was even deployed.
How did the room react? I mean, with stakes that high, I imagine chaos might have erupted.
Panic. And that's where the power of the rigorous human procedure really asserted itself. Panic was completely averted precisely because no one was allowed to improvise. They immediately stopped everything and turned back to that thick binder, the script. The script they had followed so painstakingly all day contained detailed contingency plans for hardware faults just like this. The auditors and ICANN staff conferred, but every single action they took was guided by the predetermined approved protocol. No one winged it.
So the human element, which was the potential vulnerability, also provided the structure for recovery. They didn't solve the problem through some stroke of technical genius in the moment. They solved it through procedural discipline.
That's exactly right. They initiated a painstaking reboot and verification protocol from the binder. This required them to check logs, confirm the status of components, ensure that all the physical sealing mechanisms were still intact. It was a slow, methodical process of elimination, designed to confirm whether the red light was just a transient hardware glitch or a genuine compromise of the cryptographic material.
Okay.
And every step was documented, every action witnessed.
After what must have felt like an eternity, agonizing minutes, what was the resolution?
They ran the diagnostic command one more time. The sources describe this collective intake of breath as everyone in the room just held still, waiting. This time, the light settled on a steady, solid green. The procedure was verified clean. The KSK was deemed intact and uncompromised. That terrifying pause, the moment the machine seemed to fail, was the ultimate confirmation that the rigor and the human-guided procedure were not just necessary. They were the only things that prevented a major systemic failure. If they had lacked that rigid framework, the human instinct to rush or improvise might have ruined the entire key.
So the crack in the dam was not only identified and addressed, but the initial attempt to fix it nearly failed itself. They successfully navigated the tightrope walk. Now, let's look at the flood of consequences that followed the successful generation of that key.
With the KSK successfully generated and verified on June 16, 2010, ICANN moved very quickly. The key was used to sign the operational key, the ZSK, and the full deployment of the signed root zone went live just 1 month later, on July 15, 2010. This was, for all intents and purposes, the birth of the secure internet as we know it today.
Let's nail down the definition of DNS-SCC again, Domain Name System Security Extensions. You called it the Internet's universal notary. How does it get from being a physical key in a vault to a system of notary?
It basically turns electronic wishful thinking into cryptographic proof. Before DNS-SEC, you just had to hope the address you got was the right one. DNS-SEC ensures that when your browser asks for an address, it doesn't just receive the address. It also receives a cryptographic signature proving that the address hasn't been tampered with since it left the authoritative server. That signature is what functions as the notary seal.
And this all relies entirely on an unbroken chain of signatures, starting with the KSK generated in Culpeper. If the chain breaks anywhere along the line, the whole system fails. Let's break down the 4 essential links in that chain for the listener.
Okay, so link 1 is the root. This is the KSK from this ceremony. It is the ultimate digital seal, protected by all that physical security. It signs the master list of all the top-level domains, the TLDs. This is the unshakable anchor.
And then what happens next as you go down the hierarchy?
So link 2 is the TLDs. These are the registries like .com, .net, or the national domains like .uk or .gov. They use the root's authority to cryptographically sign their own regional zone files, so they receive the root stamp of approval, which guarantees their authenticity to the rest of the world.
So the TLDs are essentially holding the second-tier notary stamp. Then we get down to the actual websites we visit every day.
Right. Link 3 is the individual websites and domains. Every organization that opts into DNS-SEC, and today this is increasingly mandatory for high-security services like banks or government agencies, has its specific web address cryptographically signed by its TLD registry. So if you run a company, your domain is signed by, let's say, the .com registry, which in turn is verified by the root key. This creates a provable, unbroken line of trust that goes from a specific website all the way back to that sealed vault in Virginia.
And link 4 is what brings this whole abstract system directly into our daily lives.
Link 4 is the browser and the recursive resolver. This is your computer, or more likely your internet service provider. When you type in a web address, your ISP's DNS resolver performs 2 vital functions. First, it queries the servers to get the address and, crucially, all the cryptographic signatures. Second, it checks the entire chain of trust. It demands receipts at every level from the domain up to the TLD and finally all the way to the root. If the entire chain is valid, the connection proceeds. If the signature is broken or missing at any point, the resolver refuses the connection.
And this is the modern safeguard against that crisis we talked about at the start, cache poisoning.
Exactly. Let's recap the old vulnerability. In the old system, a criminal could silently redirect you by tricking a local server into caching a fraudulent IP address. Since there was no verification, you were toast.
But now that silent redirection is impossible to pull off successfully.
Right. If a criminal tries to inject a fraudulent address today, that fake address will be missing the necessary valid cryptographic signature that traces back to the KSK. Your computer, or your DNS resolver, will instantly detect that the signature chain is broken, and it will reject the forgery. The connection fails securely, which is a good thing. It prevents you from ever landing on the phishing site in the first place.
So we can draw a direct, unbroken line. The rigorous physical ritual performed by 7 crypto officers in Culpeper, Virginia on June 16, 2010 is the direct ancestor of that secure padlock icon that appears in your browser billions of times a day. It's the visible symbol of that unseen shield.
It is the absolute foundation of secure global e-commerce. Think about it. Every payment processor, every secure login you use, every financial transaction that requires certainty about identity, all of it relies on this foundational integrity.
Now let's widen the lens a bit and look at the geopolitical implications of all this. Why did ICANN insist on this transparent, multi-stakeholder governance model for the root key rather than just having, say, the U.S. government maintain control, as was the case with the early DNS infrastructure?
That is a point of significant analysis for scholars like Laura DeNardis. They argue, and I think correctly, that technical infrastructure governance is inherently a site of political power. Control over the root KSK is, effectively, control over the ultimate trust layer of the internet. If one country, say the US or China, had unilateral control, they could be pressured by their government to shut down or compromise access to certain domains, or even manipulate the keys for political ends.
So by internationalizing the accountability, by selecting these TCRs from diverse, independent regions all over the world, they were intentionally creating a political balance of power.
It's the multi-stakeholder model in action, something advocated by figures like Milton Mueller. The transition from single-entity U.S. government control to ICANN's diverse model was a very deliberate political act. It was designed to depoliticize the Internet's core function, The ceremony's radical transparency, the public documentation, the global representation, it all serves as a mechanism to uphold global internet stability and ensure no single government can unilaterally control this critical resource.
It's the taming of cyberspace, in a way. The internet's integrity is secured not just by complex mathematics, but by a global social contract that demands procedural accountability and distributed authority.
And that contract gets renewed every time those crypto officers meet in that cage.
We're left with this really powerful paradox, one that kind of underlies our whole modern existence. We talk constantly about the abstract, weightless digital cloud, about artificial intelligence and global networks. Yet the entire edifice of this modern world is anchored to a fragile, intensely physical ritual performed by a handful of people inside a steel vault.
It highlights an ultimate truth, doesn't it? That pure code is insufficient for trust. The most sophisticated cryptographic shield ever devised still requires a human anchor. It requires a social contract that binds the operators of the system to a script of verifiable integrity. The high-tech machine is still guided, at its core, by the human hand.
And that reliance on the human hand means the ultimate vulnerability still lies with the integrity and the character of the keepers themselves. You can have the best cryptography in the world, but if the people holding the physical keys are coerced or blackmailed or compromised, the trust fails.
And that is exactly why the distributed trust model is the primary safeguard. The security architecture is physical and procedural, but the defense against coercion is geopolitical. You can't just arrest one person or raid one office to compromise the KSK. To successfully undermine the key, you'd need to compromise a sufficient quorum of globally distributed, independent technical experts. People like Moussa Guebre in Burkina Faso or Bevel Wooding in Trinidad, and you'd have to do it simultaneously.
It transforms a technical security problem into a massive diplomatic and logistical nightmare for any adversarial state, which dramatically raises the barrier to compromise.
Precisely. And this is also why the ceremonies are a constant, necessary maintenance. It's not a one-time fix. We have to remember that the KSK key generated back in 2010 had an expiration date. It needed to be replaced.
Right. Tell us about the first major KSK rollover in 2018. That must have been a highly stressful sequel to the original ceremony.
It was a huge, critical proof point for the whole system. On October 11, 2018, the Internet underwent its first ever root zone KSK rollover. This involved generating and distributing a brand new root key, retiring the 2010 key, and then ensuring that every system and Internet service provider around the world updated their trust anchor without fracturing the chain of trust.
A failure during that rollover would be bad. It would mean millions of users would suddenly find their browsers reporting that previously secure sites were now untrustworthy, all because the cryptographic root had suddenly changed without their system getting the memo.
The logistical challenge was enormous. They needed every major ISP and every major DNS resolver to install the new trust anchor before the old one expired. It was a global race against a cryptographic clock that had been ticking since 2010. The success of that rollover was a huge deal. It demonstrated that the process was resilient, sustainable, and capable of long-term survival under human stewardship. It proved the model worked.
And that brings us back to what you're calling the fragility thesis. The story of securing the internet is a perfect microcosm of our modern world.
I think so. It reveals that these robust, reliable systems we depend on every day, commerce, communication, security, they all rest on these invisible hinges, these moments of intense human procedure, of physical ritual, of organizational integrity. We assume the network is this autonomous, self-healing thing. But the solution to its existential threat wasn't found in a new algorithm. It was found in an armored vault, a detailed binder, and the ethical rigor of a handful of global experts.
So the integrity of the internet, at the end of the day, depends on the character of the keepers and the rigidity of the ritual they perform in the cage. It's a profoundly human-shaped solution to an exponential digital problem. So we've journeyed today from the theoretical flaw of the internet's original sin and the near catastrophe of the Kaminsky bug, all the way to the successful yet harrowing creation of the ultimate digital anchor inside a secure steel cage in Culpeper, Virginia.
And that one physical act created the unseen shield of DNS-SCC. It's the cryptographic chain that now silently authenticates and protects every secure connection you make online, working billions and billions of times a day to prevent digital forgery.
The knowledge nugget here, I think, is clear. The most critical infrastructure in our abstract, high-tech world is secured by profoundly physical human procedures. It is a structure built by human hands, and it requires constant physical care to prevent digital chaos from taking over.
And this leads us to the final provocative thought for you to take away. We relied on the integrity and the procedural rigor of a handful of individuals to save the global web. What other critical physical anchors is our modern abstract world turning on right now? Think about the world's major systems: financial clearinghouses, global shipping coordination, nuclear launch procedures. They're all resting on invisible hinges, secured only by the character and dedication of people following a painstaking, rigorous script.
Something to mull over the next time you see that secure padlock icon pop up in your browser. For the deep dive, thank you for joining us.